Now, we have some minutes for Q&A. I am actually going to preference, if there are, given that we have 33 experts from political parties here, I'm actually going to preference citizen members in this Q&A, because I think that's fairer. If there's no citizens, certainly, then of course we'll go to politicians. Yeah.
Andrew Kinsella is my name. Just for a matter of clarity, and thank you for making that comment about giving some ordinary citizen members of the convention some preference. I appreciate it. In the context of the convention for this weekend, or perhaps the question which was raised earlier around the appointment of the executive, is that to be covered within this weekend, or has it been covered at a previous meeting, or will it be covered at a future meeting? I'm not clear on that.
Yeah, it will be. Is this on? It will be one of the things that you'll be hearing about tomorrow morning is other things that you might want to discuss in more detail in June, and that could be one of them.
That could be one of them.
But it depends on how you vote this weekend as to whether it is one of them.
I understand. Thank you.
I mean, this does go back to my comment at the very beginning. There is this potentially very large purview of issues we could deal with here, and we do actually have to spend this weekend trying to narrow down the focus, particularly for next weekend. I think Deirdre was next. Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, Deirdre Donaghy.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is there any indication or is there any consistency as to which system gives the better turnout from voters, or does it just vary place to place?
Okay, I'm going to take 3 questions, and then we'll go to the panel. Tom.
Tom Burke, just a point of clarification, David. Where you have the MMP system, would it be normal for what we call a local candidate to also appear on the list, or would it be exclusively one or the other? Thank you.
Okay, over there, Fiona.
Fiona Wielden, just a quick question there for David. Is it possible to use AV with the MMP instead of the FPTP?
Okay, good. He's really going to feel at home now in the classroom. David.
Yeah, my nerd juices are flowing. This is great. I didn't catch your name,
Fiona.
but yes, Fiona. Any possible range of options is possible. So there's no limit. The sky's the limit there. So you could certainly have alternative vote with list, definitely. In terms of Tom's question about whether you might have local politicians who run both as constituency candidates and as list candidates, some versions of MMP allow it and some don't. But for example, Germany does allow that, and in the jargon, these are often referred to as zombie politicians, because you'll have somebody who ran for a constituency seat, fails to get the elected, and lo and behold, top of the list, and they get in. And a good example was the former German Chancellor or Prime Minister Helmut Kohl. He lost his constituency seat, but he was top of the list, so he came back as a zombie. So it can happen, but it doesn't have to be like that. And then on turnout, I mean, Michael may be able to say more than me, but I suppose the basic point, this was Deirdre's question, is the more proportional systems tend on the whole to have better turnout, but there's not a very powerful relationship. I think that's the way I put it.
Michael, would you like to add?
Well, no, I think that is the general position, that under PR systems turnout tends to be higher than under non-PR systems, but there isn't really any particular pattern among PR systems. Turnout is influenced by so many other factors too.
There are, of course, although it hasn't been mentioned yet, there are certain countries where it's compulsory to vote. I don't know, how does that affect turnout?
I mean, Australia is the prime example, and their turnout's very high because they enforce that. So you get a fine if you don't vote in the Australian system. You have a number of the newer democracies that have a certain number that have gone down that way, but among the established democracies, there are very few that have compulsory voting.
Okay, another round of comments from the floor. Keith first.
Keith Burke, Kildare North. What's direct democracy?
Direct democracy?
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
What's direct democracy?
Oh, sorry.
I've heard it over the last year or two. I'm just wondering, is
The
it
basic idea
similar?
of direct democracy, or do you want to?
No, let's take a few, yeah.
Hi, Paula Shaden. I'm just wondering, if there was compulsory voting, do you think it might skew the actual voting? Like, so people just vote because they have to, rather than voting for people who generally, like, are good for the country?
Okay, again, could we go, Katrina?
I suppose I'm kind of and I'm sorry, I'm a politician. I know you were just looking for citizens, but I just wanted to make 2 points. And I'm in a kind of a unique situation because I live in Louth, but I'm elected in the north, so I'm voting in all the southern elections, and I've also been a candidate in first past the post, so direct to Westminster, and then also Assembly. And the reason I'm saying that is the first past the post is so anti-democratic, and David, I thought your presentation was brilliant on that, because and you can really see it. It's just so anti-democratic, and particularly when you're looking at a divided society, which all our societies are divided, whether it's religion, class, whatever it is. So it's just so unfair. And whereas, look at for example, the Assembly election, and I know, Michael, you mentioned the Assembly election, so much fairer. And I'm looking at my own constituency, which would be Nationalist majority. You still have 2 out of the 6 are women, and 4 men, and then also 2 from the Unionist parties and 4 from the Nationalist party. So it's so much fairer. You don't just have one person from one tradition representing, and I really think we need to move away, or certainly I would countenance we shouldn't be looking at first past the post at all. I think that would be very undemocratic. And just one other thing I just wanted to say. It is also worth looking at what Scotland does, and maybe it's the same as Wales, but I was over in Scotland recently as part of our Assembly Commission, and they do a mixture of the list and the constituency. And the other thing the SNP do is make sure that their elected representatives have a term in both, or try and ensure that they have a term in both, because they're gaining experience, so you're mixing your experience. And one final comment, and I'll shut up then. One of the things that just disturbed me slightly about the last debate is the presumption that there's only knowledge in certain layers of our society, and there's knowledge in all layers of our society. And in fact, a better system is when we have that range of knowledge. And certainly some of the most knowledgeable people I've met aren't necessarily in our universities, and that's with the greatest respect to our academics. I know that you've the luxury of having more time to study things, but you know, some of them, the best people I've seen are people, and I lived in Nicaragua for a number of years, and some of the most radical good changes I saw were people who never had that opportunity. And actually the same in the north. Most people who negotiated the peace weren't your doctors and solicitors and academics, and though they were obviously part of it too.
Okay, thank you. Comments there, and maybe I'd go on this side as well, if you do have any comments. David, you...
Yeah, I mean, certainly Michael Marsh, I imagine, might want to comment on the compulsory voting thing, more experienced than me. But Keith, on direct democracy, the essence of it is... David. Oh, I beg your pardon, I'm sorry. Keith, on the direct democracy, the idea is it's, the citizens have a possibility to call for a referendum on a certain issue. So they can demand by some kind of signature process, for example, a petition, that we want to have a referendum on this matter, and then the referendum happens, and there are all sorts of rules around that. So that's what the essence of direct democracy is. And so, it's not total anarchy. No, there are sort of rules. You need a minimum number of signatures and all that. And there are a number of countries that use direct democracy, so it is common enough. And I just comment on Katrina's point. I completely agree with you about knowledge is much more widespread than nerdy types here. And that's one reason why often there's an argument in favour of proportional representation, because the more proportional your system, the greater the range of voices that get into the Parliament. So there is a good normative argument in favour of proportional representation.
Michael, do you want to comment on anything?
I'll comment on the compulsory voting. I mean, the issue there is about, I suppose, the quality of the electoral decision when everybody takes part. And one argument is that compulsory voting is good because parties then have to appeal to all voters, not just the voters that actually turn out and vote. So one argument is that parties actually don't worry much about 18 to 24-year-olds because they don't vote. So why concentrate on those? Concentrate on the old people because they all turn out and vote. They don't concentrate on heavily working class communities because they don't vote in large numbers. So we'll skip them, we'll leave them out of our programme. There's no evidence that higher turnout makes a consistent difference across the world. So the left doesn't do better where turnout is higher. But if you have compulsory voting, clearly everybody has to vote. Some of those don't know what they're doing. So in an Irish election, if you had compulsory voting, I think you would have, the position on the list would matter an awful lot more than it does at the moment, because lots of people would just turn up without necessarily informing themselves. As a solution, I think it's not the solution to the problem. If the problem is low turnout, I think there are other ways to go about fixing it.
Yeah, and we discussed some of those at the very first meeting about civic education and so on. Niamh or Murish, would you like to comment?
I'm a little bit disturbed at the suggestion that by raising the issue of expertise, I might somehow be thought to be advocating the idea of the rule of the nerds. No, we know our place. It's sitting in front of a computer writing stuff and standing in front of students trying to get them interested in stuff. The point about different access routes to cabinet positions was about skill mix, and it was about varieties of expertise. So if you were a Prime Minister, you might want to bring in somebody with a specialist expertise on, I don't know, like tax or something, but you might want to bring in stronger, expertise on disability rights or on migration experiences or any sorts of things. My point is simply about the narrow sort of channel of access that we have at the moment for recruiting people into positions of political influence, both in the Parliament and in the government, and it's particularly narrow in comparative perspective. So what I wanted to simply draw your attention to was the fact that there's actually a range of different ways of doing things out there, which might merit being looked at.
Thanks, Niamh. Murish, you have the last word if you want it.
Oh, well, Chairman, with some trepidation, dare I mention the fact that both the 1922 and 1937 constitutions gave explicit mention to people from universities being in a certain other chamber of the Oireachtas, which shall not be mentioned. So there was actually a provision, as you might be aware, for senators to be appointed from the universities in both 1922 and 1937, precisely on this basis of we need different voices. We can't just have the same electoral system for the second house because you'll get the same type of people. What do we do? We'll change the rules as to who gets in there. So there's always been some notion floating around, in fact, that people from the universities might be the worst people to have in the Parliament. But there you go.
Okay. I think we're going to leave it there because we've reached the end of the time for the session. People need a chance to stretch their legs and resume and fertilising your discussion with all the very interesting material that you've received this morning. So resume in about 10 minutes. Thank you for the roundtable discussion.